Hi, I'm Dr. John Douillard, and today I want to talk about how to resolve mental and emotional trauma and stress with Ayurveda. I was recently interviewed by one of the best herbalists in the country, David Crow, his company Floracopia. They put on a plant summit, and I dove deep into this topic, and it's so topical right now. We have people, experiencing huge amounts of stress from the pandemic, from the economy, from the racial tensions. There's just so many things for us to be stressed about. And Ayurveda goes deeply into this topic, and I invite you to watch my interview. I think I had an opportunity to go really deep with David, and I think it's a really great interview to watch, so please check that out. But I want to also just go over some other points here that may help give us some insight into how Ayurveda would deal with these emotional traumas and emotional stress. One study showed that 95% of the things that we think and say and do as adults come from impressions we experienced in the first 6 years of life, which means that most of what we're doing and thinking and saying is coming from impressions from really, really early on, which means that we're pretty unconscious in terms of how we live our lives. And Ayurveda was really set on doing really one thing: becoming conscious, becoming aware, deeply aware of how you can engage in your life, as opposed to being somehow programmed to respond to stressors and situations in certain ways based on patterns of behavior and belief systems that were created so many, many years ago. And we end up, as a result of those old protective patterns, doing the same dumb thing again and again in our lives, right? That's sort of how it works. And many of these protective patterns are survival based, right? If you went and as a kid, went into a cave and a bear chased you out and almost killed you, you could go back to that cave, 90 years later and may have never been there since. And you would remember that cave and know not to go in there. These emotional traumas are written into the white matter of our brain from the Ayurvedic perspective to make sure that we don't, put the species at risk, in harm's way. And one of the things that Ayurveda, talks about is how to become conscious. Rites of passage were a tradition, in most cultures, to make sure we go from being a child who needs love and attention and support from mom and dad to being the love and actually feeling free to be and do your thing. Most kids, are very dependent on making sure mom and dad are watching over us, and mom and dad are sort of wired to watch over them. But, kids are very dependent on needing that love and support. And if the mom and dad didn't care, the kid would wander into the jungle, get eaten by a lion, and there'd be no people here. So that dependency on needing love as a child is a dopamine reward chemical event that locks us into repetitive patterns of behavior to need and source love and seek approval and become important and special, or get things that make us feel that way over a lifetime. And we end up in our culture, because we just kind of overwhelmed our environment and our culture with dopamine ways to activate the dopamine reward chemical pathways. So we just get overstimulated with stuff from the outside. And we never really have to take that risk to let the delicate petals of our flower open and let who we really are out. We don't really have to do that. But rites of passage were that thing. Rites of passage were Native Americans would have to do these sort of crazy, becoming of age kind of things to prove to them and themselves that they were free. Like a mama leopard would say, okay, baby leopard, I'm going to go north. You're now on your own. You're going to do your own thing. And you're going to have to fend for yourself and, hunt for yourself and all that on your own. Nobody's going to help you. In our culture, we continue that with dopamine and reward chemistry and shopping and just a whole bunch of things like that, which really are bad, because we become dependent on the outside world to fill us up, and that becomes a problem. Now, in Ayurveda, it's said that the feelings and the impressions and the stress are experienced in our heart, called sadhaka pitta, sadhaka. And those impressions are carried to the brain through what's called pranavata. And the pranavata scribes or writes these impressions into the white matter of the brain, the waxy myelin sheaths of your brain, the white matter deep inside your brain. And that in Ayurveda is called tarpaka kapha, which means to record. So these old impressions are recorded in the white matter of the brain and written into the white matter of the brain. Tarpaka kapha also means to cleanse or to clean out or to flush. And it has to do with the cerebral spinal fluid that's washing the brain through the ventricles, cleaning the brain out on a regular basis. Modern science now tells us, a study about 10, 15 years ago now, the University of Virginia, they discovered lymphatics in the brain that drain 3 pounds of plaque and garbage out of your head every year while you sleep. If you don't sleep well, you don't drain the brain very well. And they've linked congestion of the brain lymphatics now to a host of health concerns, including anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, inflammation, infection, and even autoimmune concerns, which means that in the Western medical journals, there's a mechanism for autoimmunity which really doesn't exist in medical practice, hasn't reached medical practice yet. But in Ayurveda, they talked about how the brain lymphs, when they get congested, they can sort of create a block, an emotional block that, when we think about it, when something really bad happens to you, you have an emotional trauma, someone really, special passes away, we somehow are able to forge through that in time and get back to a life. It's not that we ever forget them, but we're able to somehow, in most cases, forge on. And that Ayurveda calls the block of the Tarpika kapha, which is like the sagittal sinus across the top of your head. And when that sagittal sinus lymphs get blocked, we stop feeling a little bit. We kind of can wall off that emotion and become disconnected from that deep experience of who we truly are. It's a sort of a bridge around troubled water, you could say. And it's not necessarily in our best interest. So Ayurveda developed a technique called nasya, where they use nasal inhalation to clean out these brain lymphs. And so it turns out that 40 to 50% of the lymphs in the brain drain through the paranasal sinuses. So Ayurveda, thousands of years ago, figured out that if we could use medicated oils and sniff them and deep them and cleanse, deeply into the sinuses, we could maybe affect a decongestion of those brain lymphatics. And it's called nasya. It's one of the 5 most powerful detox therapies in Ayurvedic medicine. And I wrote an article about that because when I administered Panchakarma for 26 years, that was the #1 go-to therapy to elicit a transformational, rid yourself of old emotional patterns and become free of those patterns process. And that was the nasya therapy that we did. It's called Shiro Abhyanga Nasya. Sometimes we call it Super Nasya because it's way more than just sniffing a little oil up your nose because your sinuses are dry. And I invite you to read that article. It's called Nasya, Sinus Cleansing and Emotional Baggage. Go to LifeSpa.com, just type that in, Nasya, Sinus Cleansing and Emotional Baggage. Read an article about how to do that at home and a video of how to do that at home, because it's such an important therapy to know how to do it yourself at home, because doing regular cleansing of those brain lymphs are so critical for so many things. Just think of your brain dumping 3 pounds of plaque out of your head every year while you sleep. And if that's not happening, you just can only imagine how problematic that would be long term, right? So many things will be affected by that, which is really, really important. There was one patient of mine who had a goiter in her neck, really huge goiter. She had hyperthyroidism, and she wanted me to treat her, and we worked with her medical doctor to make sure that she was, not in harm's way. And we gave her this nasya therapy 3 times. And because it's an emotional release therapy, we gave her some journaling to do to unravel and to be able to write and document any of that down. And she said after the 3rd treatment, she was writing in her journal, she had this epiphany where she was abused when she was 14 years old, completely had forgotten the experience, the event. She hadn't thought about that in years. She said what was really strange was I was looking at my life before the event and my life after the event. And my life before was this happy-go-lucky kid. My life after was this stressed out, hyper-vigilant, 90-hour-week perfectionist corporate executive. And she was becoming perfect to be safe. And she looked at her life before, super happy-go-lucky, and then this event, and then she just burned out her adrenals, her blood sugar, and now her thyroid. And she was like, the event wasn't great, but it wasn't worth 25 years of my life. And she said, I was just able to drop it. Critical piece of that puzzle is she didn't have to be dragged through the emotional experience again and relive it. She was just looked at her life before, after, how she responded to it, and she was just able to drop it and gain access to something more real, her truth. And that's what Tarpaka Kapha does. When you clean out the brain, you release those old emotional patterns, those emotional blocks, and you drop into a feeling of safety, of security, of joy. You don't have to hold on to that trauma anymore. You can get underneath it, which is just a really beautiful experience. Within a week of doing that, her thyroid goiter was gone. Her thyroid numbers came down like 200 or 300 points the first week. By 9 months later, her thyroid had normalized. So it's a powerful story. I've just seen so many amazing things happen with that therapy. That's just one of the therapies that Ayurveda uses to kind of help resolve mental, emotional trauma. It's just, quite phenomenal. There's herbs that we use to can clean out the brain lymphatics and the lymphs of the whole body. And herbs like Mangista, and I invite you to read about the science. And I've written about all these herbs, Mangista, an herb called Brahmi, or we call it Brahmi brain, which is Centella asiatica, an herb called lymph cleanse, which has red root in it, which is one of the most powerful lymph movers that we know of, an herb called lymph vein, which has this pith of the oranges, which has been shown to actually increase microcirculation of the lymph and circulatory system and move the brain lymphs. And so there's a handful of herbs that you can read about. And I wrote an article about this as well, so please read the article where I go into some of the detail. But then there's so yoga and breathing techniques are and doing nasya and exercising and nasal breathing exercise, which my first book, Body, Mind, Sport, was all about. These are all about getting that cerebral spinal fluid to move and wash the brain. But now we have to kind of, if the impressions were written into the white matter of the brain, sort of like on a waxy sheath written into that wax, Ayurveda use vibrational therapies to create sort of a vibration to kind of like if you write your name in some sand and then you shake the sand, it's gone. In a similar way, Ayurveda use, which is quite profound, vibrational therapies to help to erase and rewrite the impressions written in the white matter of the brain via Pranavata, who's the writer, and Tarpaka Kapha is where it is recorded so we don't forget. But some of that stuff we don't need to remember, and Ayurveda was all about, once again, becoming conscious. And this is how they did it, right? So they use techniques like breathing techniques and pranayama techniques and chanting techniques, chanting creating vibration, using breathing techniques when you hold your ears and you hum, creating a vibration in the brain that increases your nitric oxide by 15 times just by humming, which is a Nobel Prize winning molecule that was used as the panacea to cure everything in 1998, won the Nobel Prize in chemistry, right? So sort of crazy stuff, using breathing techniques like kumbhak, which is the breath retention, which activates something called intermittent hypoxia, which has been also shown to increase neuroplasticity in the brain, stem cells, nitric oxide, EPO, which is what Lance Armstrong got busted for injecting, transcription factors that protect your genome. But the powerful part is the neuroplasticity part, the part that can change the elasticity of the brain, so it's not holding on to those old patterns. That's what kumbhak, pranayama, breath retention was all about. That's what chanting is all about. That's what chanting works. It creates a vibration to free the mind of these old impressions. Pranayama techniques have been shown to increase, with breath retention, increase slow, very, very slow delta waves, which have been shown to use in an evolutionary sense to absolutely change and restore brain function and do deep repair to the brain and to the brain chemistry and the brain structure. This is crazy, right? These are things that you don't make slow delta waves in your brain on a regular basis. Gamma waves, considered to be the spiritual wave, to create super heightened awareness so you're not distracted by the outside world, so you can go in. Again, replicated regularly with techniques like Bhastrika and Kapalabhati and other Ayurvedic breathing techniques. So when you put all this together, you're looking at breathing techniques and pranayama techniques and breath retention techniques and brain nasya therapy techniques, herbs to support this the same, and then and the yoga and the breathing, and of course the meditation to help, in a sense, rewrite new impressions based on you as opposed to based on what you think you need from the outside world. I just think it's quite fascinating when you understand how Ayurveda really works, what Ayurveda was really about, and it was about us becoming conscious. So I invite you, watch this interview with David Crow. We went deeply into this topic. It was a great interview. I loved it. David Crow is brilliant, and we had a great interaction. So please watch that. You can check it out here and there's a link to that on the bottom of this video. So please check it out, and also check out this article at LifeSpa.com. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard. Do you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe and share.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at LifeSpa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.